Last week, President Donald Trump nominated former CIA Director Mike Pompeo to be the new Secretary of State, and to replace him at the CIA, he nominated Gina Haspel, who is a literal war criminal. Now, when I tell you about Mike Pompeo or Gina Haspel, any normal, rational thinking human being is instinctively against these individuals, because when it comes to Mike Pompeo, he's a pro-torture warmonger who's hawkish on not only North Korea and Iran, but Russia as well, and he also thinks that Edward Snowden should be killed. And when it comes to Gina Haspel, she's a literal war criminal who gleefully tortured human beings at the behest of the Bush administration. So Gina Haspel should literally be in a jail cell right now, but she is being nominated by President Trump to be the next CIA director, which is a very powerful position for someone so morally bankrupt. So when I heard that President Trump nominated these two individuals, I was repulsed. Any normal person should be repulsed by them once you hear about them. So I thought, even though Democrats, they're terrible, of course they're going to put up a fight, right? They're going to fight Donald Trump on this tooth and nail, right? Well, when it comes to the so-called leader of the resistance in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, he actually indicated that he'd support Mike Pompeo, saying, quote, "If he's confirmed, we hope that Mr. Pompeo will turn over a new leaf and will start toughening up our policies towards Russia and Putin." So, because Mike Pompeo is hawkish with Russia, that's a reason why Chuck Schumer might be inclined to support him. I thought it was the Democratic Party that's supposed to be the liberal anti-war party, and here we have Chuck Schumer basing his vote on Mike Pompeo being a war hawk. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. But not all hope is lost, because Democrats are actually being pressured from the left to block both Pompeo and Haspel. Now, I just want to stop for a moment and reflect on that, because the fact that we even have to exert any sort of pressure on Democrats whatsoever to resist these two lunatics, it pisses me off. Why the fuck do we have to tell the Democratic Party, who labels themselves as the resistance, to not go along with Donald Trump appointing a literal war criminal? They should have been resisting this from the minute it was announced. But the fact that there's even a question or doubt that they'll not resist is absurd. It makes me so angry. Now, going by what Democrats are saying, well, they're not saying very much. And let me tell you, their silence is deafening, because the fact that they won't tell us if they're going to oppose Donald Trump's nominees, the fact that they're being coy in and of itself is a big statement. So when it comes to Dianne Feinstein, for example, she actually is one of the senators that hasn't really given us an indication as to where she stands, but since she's facing a primary challenge to the left of her, actually two primary challengers who criticized her ambivalence towards Trump's horrific nominations, she's reportedly, quote, moving in the direction of being tougher when it comes to Pompeo and Haspel. Now, when it comes to Tim Kaine, Hillary Clinton's former VP pick, he actually voted to confirm Mike Pompeo to be the CIA director, and he hasn't stated yet if he'll support him again, even if he did cite major concerns with him being Secretary of State. When it comes to Jeanne Shaheen, who also voted to confirm Mike Pompeo as CIA director, well, she didn't say whether or not she'd support him as Secretary of State, but, quote, she wants to gauge his answers to budget and personnel questions before deciding how she'll vote. As for Mark Warner, he's being coy with regard to Haspel, saying there's going to be legitimate questions she'll have to answer, but when it comes to Pompeo, he also voted to confirm him as CIA director, so it may very well be the case that he will support his bid to be Secretary of State. And Bill Nelson may have voted against Mike Pompeo to be Trump's CIA director, but he's reportedly open to Gina Haspel. And when it comes to Joe Manchin, he is refusing to state whether or not he will support or oppose Donald Trump's nominations. So the fact that they won't tell us their position is outrageous. The fact that they didn't immediately sound the alarms once these nominations were announced is a scandal in and of itself. They've had, a week and a half now to start resisting, and they haven't yet? They still won't tell us if they're going to resist? This party is a fucking joke. They have to be the weakest opposition party in the history of not only U.S. politics, but potentially the world. It's an absolute joke, but there is someone who is deciding to resist Donald Trump. Besides progressives like Bernie Sanders, who expectedly denounced these nominations, Rand Paul is doing a better job resisting than the so-called resistance, the self-proclaimed resistance, a Republican, mind you. So this is what he had to say about Mike Pompeo and Gina Haspel and why he's opposed to them.
You know, the president, one of the things I liked about President Trump, and still do like, is that he continues to say the Iraq war was a mistake. But when you say it's a mistake, basically what you're saying is that regime change in the Middle East leads often to unintended consequences. Well, he keeps appointing people around him who love the Iraq war so much that they're ready for a war with Iran next. And so I don't think you really want people who are eager for war to be running the State Department. You want a diplomat. I frankly think that Pompeo's positions are too much of an advocate for regime change really everywhere. North Korea, Iran, Russia, you name it. And I think really we need to see the world as it is. Doesn't mean we need to support what happens everywhere in the world, but I don't think our policy ought to be for regime change. And so I think Pompeo really isn't a good fit to be a diplomat or to be the chief diplomat. With regard to Haspel, I think that, you know, what America stands for is not torture. You know, torture is the hallmark of totalitarianism. We should be that hope for the rest of the world, that people who, you know, who want to resist totalitarianism, that, you know, they want to be free from torture. They don't want to be free to torture. And so I really think that it's inappropriate to put someone at the head of the CIA. They have so much power. Power to assassinate, power to spy, power to collect all the data on everyone in the world. I don't think the person running that agency should be someone who ran a secret prison in Thailand.
So what he's making here are common sense points. If you want to be Secretary of State, you should be a diplomat. That's common sense. Now, when it comes to Gina Haspel, he described just how despicable of a person she really is when he made a press statement a couple of days ago, and this really shows just how deplorable Gina Haspel is as a human being.
A quote from one of the interrogators says that Gina Haspel said, "Good job. I like the way you're drooling." This is about Zubedee, who, as he was being waterboarded. "It adds to the realism. I'm almost buying it. You wouldn't think a grown man would do that." When you read that, sort of the joyful glee at someone who's being tortured, I find it just amazing that anyone would consider having this woman at the head of the CIA. And so my opposition to her is over her direct participation in interrogation and her gleeful enjoyment at the suffering of someone being tortured.
That's who Trump nominated, someone who not only was complicit in torture, but partook in the action. Gleefully so. That morally depraved lunatic is now potentially going to be one of the most powerful people in the country because of Donald Trump. And Rand Paul is one of the few people speaking out, a Republican. It blows my mind, honestly. The state of politics in America is so dismal. I don't think that people will believe just how shitty Democrats are when they go back and read about this time in the history books. So the question is, if Rand Paul opposes them, what is he doing to oppose them specifically? Well, he's taking action.
I'll do whatever it takes, and that includes filibuster. I will try to make a point to the American people, and maybe the American people will rise up and say, you know, we stand in solidarity with those who seek freedom from torture, not the freedom to torture. It's just inconsistent with who we are as a people to have someone run our spy agency that has all this enormous power, who is intimately involved with torture, and from everything we're reading was supportive of the policy. And so, no, I can't support that, and I will do everything I can, including filibuster. You know, filibuster doesn't stop anyone. The only way I would stop anyone is if we convinced, you know, enough senators, and it would take actually a majority, I think, in this case, to actually stop their appointment. But, you know, when you read through the torture report that Senator Feinstein put forward, I would hope that she will stand up and say, enough's enough. We're not going to appoint people who made fun of the process. And really, one of the worrisome things about Gina Haspel is she was also involved with destroying the tapes. There were actually videotapes of trying to drown these people and torture them, and these videotapes were destroyed years later. So first she was involved with the waterboarding, and then years later she was involved with destroying the tapes. There's no way in the world that she should be running our spy agencies with all of their power.
So Rand Paul has taken a clear stance. He's choosing to resist Donald Trump and be more vocal in his opposition to Trump's nominees than the Democratic Party, who might still go along with them. a literal war criminal who should be in prison. And look, it's not like Rand Paul is a saint. I disagree with him on a substantial amount of issues. But at the same time, he's doing something that we should expect the so-called liberal party to do. But the fact of the matter is that resisting is hard, and being ambivalent is a lot easier, because when you really take a stand for what's right, you make yourself a target. Donald Trump may make a mean tweet about you. You may be attacked by neoconservatives and other Republicans, but Rand Paul actually did get attacked. And this is how he responded to nonsensical attacks on his position.
Liz Cheney of Wyoming, the daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney, tweeted about you this week saying, quote, Gina Haspel has spent her career defending the American people and homeland. Rand Paul is defending and sympathizing with terrorists, unquote. Your response?
You know, juvenile, but I think the Cheneys, both father and daughter, could spend a lifetime trying to justify the thousands of soldiers, thousands of Iraqis who died in the Iraq War, which was an unnecessary war, made the Middle East less stable, emboldened Iran, and really have been wrong about every foreign policy decision of the last 4 years. So I think when they're done explaining why people had to die in Iraq, why people had to be maimed in Iraq, and why it really made the situation worse, the Cheneys can then stand up and try to make some points about other foreign policy. But until they prove that they know anything about, the world, I think probably they ought to just be quiet.
And that's it. You simply disregard these attacks because taking a stand, taking the right moral position is important. It's the Democratic Party that always boasts about their values and how their values are superior to Republican Party values, but here they are, not taking a stand when this should be a no-brainer. I mean, a war hawk as Secretary of State, a war criminal as CIA Director. What better opportunity than this to prove to us that your values are superior to that of the Republican parties? But here they are, refusing to tell us where they stand even. All because why? Well, maybe they're afraid of being criticized by Republicans or Donald Trump. Think of how conflict-averse Democrats really are. They caved just 2.5 days into a government shutdown because they were afraid of being blamed for said government shutdown, and this was after they promised Dreamers that they'd hold strong. But Dreamers are still vulnerable, and the Democratic Party, they've taken all of their bargaining chips and they've flushed them down the toilet. Dreamers are not being protected, and they're still not choosing to display any bit of strength whatsoever. And the fact that they're acting so weak allows Republicans and Donald Trump to capitalize on their weakness and take advantage of them. That's why Donald Trump wasn't afraid to nominate someone like Mike Pompeo or Gina Haspel, because he knows he's going to face little to no opposition from the Democratic Party, the opposition party to someone who they often call a fascist. This is what Democrats say, but what are they doing? Jack fucking shit to oppose him.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.